Thank you so much, Dr. Dow. That was awesome. So I see that you have, let's see what questions you have here. So let me see if I see
Sure, I
them
can stop sharing.
while you,
And I can look at the question. So it says, I'll read this question. It's curiosity and signs of intelligence in Black children was discouraged, suppressed, and often punished during slavery. Why do teachers, the police continue to practice mental and physical repression of qualities often recognized as signs of high intelligence in white America and around the world, including West Africa? Why are we still suffering from this? So, I think these are really important questions. And I think some of this talk is about thinking about both explicit and implicit bias. There's research about racial empathy gaps where people, um, you know, feel less bad for. There's research that shows that when people see things happening that are negative for Black folks, that they feel less bad about those things happening to Black folks. And I mean, that's about our conditioning in our society to devalue Black individuals and Black men and Black women, Black people. So I think that's a really important question. And I mean, I think people are kind of right now. Researchers are documenting that that's the case and thinking about ways that that can change. So, for example, there's been interesting research to show that if you show lots of positive images of Black people who have accomplished a lot to people before they go in to take a survey about Black accomplishments or something, that they end up being less having less bias because they've been primed to think something positive about Black people, right? But we have a society that primes a lot of negativity, not just the Black people, not just the white people, but to the entire society. So I think that's a really important question, and it's heartbreaking that we're still having to navigate it, and that our children are having to navigate it, but our children are having to navigate it, and Black parents are having to prepare their children in the same way that their parents tried to prepare them. And what's interesting about these parents is that these parents themselves are often people who have had some experiences navigating this themselves. They were often maybe members of the first or second generation of kids that went to integrated schools. So they have some prior knowledge about the challenges that their kids are facing so that they can try to, to the extent that they've had those sort of experiences, have a little bit of, I wouldn't say expertise, but at least they have some background in how they negotiated those challenges as a kid. And maybe the second part of your question, I think that some of these fears-based preparation strategies of our children can serve as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Strategies to deflect the interaction with aggressors, such as teachers and police, can make their fear-based intimidation approach ineffective, redirecting them to use their brains instead of feed of their fear coming from brown or Black person can change the negative feedback cycle that often leads to violent overreactions by the police and unnecessary death of our sons in police custody. And in fact, why are we prepping our children like we want them to be whipped by an overseer? There must be other ways we can prepare our children so no one takes away their liberty. Can you share any research-based approaches for reducing the negative feedback cycle that our children face from teachers, caregivers, and the police? Well, I have a colleague right now who's looking at issues of implicit bias in policing at the University of Maryland. You may have heard of him. His name is Dr. Rashawn Ray. And he is looking at he does virtual reality labs to try to understand how implicit bias works for police officers. That's one that part of it is sort of diagnosing the issue, right? And I think that, like I said, I think people are in a complicated paradox here because they many parents will say, keep your cool in the situation, get back to me alive, and then we'll deal with it. So even at school, when they're having encounters that they feel as though that they're not being treated, children are feeling like so they're not being treated fairly. Many parents will counsel their kids to sort of, kind of collect information, be respectful, come home, talk to us. We'll then strategize about how to approach it together. And some parents will approach it directly as a racial issue. Other parents might, depending upon the context that their child is in, approach it using strategies that are recognizing that the people they're interacting with aren't as comfortable talking about race, so use more generic terms, right? So a story of a son being yelled at about playing a game and throwing a ball too hard might be directly talked about as that teacher was racist for yelling at my kid and making them cry. Or it might be described as, let's talk to teachers about how they should interact with kids more broadly and their emotional health and how these things can affect kids. rather than highlighting that that teacher would not have done that to another child, right? So those are strategies. But I hear your question about trying to think about other kinds of approaches. And what I would say is that some of the things I just talked about ways trying to alternatively trying people and collecting data is some of the stuff that's happening right now. Um, yeah, but I'm more the stage of diagnosing and documenting the challenges, and I'm not in the area of exactly fixing it. But I think hope that work is on its way. And then someone says, how many of the participants identified as African from the continent, and how did it shape the data? So um, there were people who I interviewed chose when they were identifying themselves, identified as um, Black American. There were some folks who had ancestry who were their parents were had immigrated from Africa, um, but they themselves would identify it. I mean, they recognize their the fact that they had sort of a that they had an immigrant history. But I would say there were more folks who. So I think there were two who had African ancestry as a part of their um, background, and then there were a number of people who had parents who either one was Black and one was um, maybe like someone who was from Jamaica or Trinidad, but that they were a mixed family, and there were um, and that comprised about 10 people on the sample. Yeah. So, but I have to go back just to, I'm kind of going through my head thinking. So I want to say that that's a preliminary answer that I'd have to go back and check because I'm kind of answering on the fly for that one. I'm just kind of scrolling through my memory of the respondents. Any other questions? Or should I shift gears, Dr. Quinlan? I don't want to.
Yes, I'm gonna switch gears. Thank you so much. That was awesome. I'm so glad you were able to do this. I'm gonna switch gears. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, and still want to hear from Miss Jacqueline Randall because this is a conversation we have. Parents have among themselves about curriculum, about STEM curriculum, and I just wanted you to be able to get a parent perspective that was, someone who is not in academia, and so. Miss Randall. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. If you can just, share with us some concerns you have that's come up related to the curriculum.
So absolutely. So I have a daughter who's 7 years old, and she's in second grade. Um, and for me, my earliest memories of just, I guess, getting perspective on how curriculum really affects her identity was in kindergarten. She actually came home really sad and disheartened because it was Black History Month, and she learned about Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, but she didn't learn about them as people and what they've done um, in isolation. You know, the context was segregation, what Black Americans could and couldn't do, and I guess the way that she internalized this was that somehow she was now less than. Um, Interestingly enough, I knew the teachers really well. One was actually we had a great partnership at school, and so I felt like I was really confident that the intention was good in terms of just teaching the history. Um, but just at 5 years old, just to watch her sort of absorb that and take that on and just internalize it and make it so personal for herself. And, we had talked a lot about Black beauty. A lot of the things that you mentioned before resonate with me, always just constantly affirming her beauty, her worth. Um, but to hear about Blackness from an academic perspective in school, in kindergarten, just in that day, just shifted everything. And so I had a really open conversation with her teachers about introducing race from a place of deficit. And it was pretty eye-opening for them and me, because I don't know if they've experienced that before. Or maybe it's had that impact, but no parent had ever called back to have the conversation. And so that was really tough. And then it's sort of now, my daughter's in second grade, but I'm realizing that this is just going to be how it is. History, as she gets older, um, the history lessons are going to going to get broader. They're going to have more depth to them. And so this is just going to be a continuous thing in school where she's going to have to receive this information, process it, um, somehow internalize it, come home, we'll have to unpack it and just and keep going. And so it's just and it's interesting because no matter what I do as a parent to positively affect um, her confidence level, hearing that at school in a classroom setting is just it weighs, it's heavy. Um, and so from a parent's perspective, it's tough because that is history. But how do you teach it in a way that isn't so I guess that isn't so negative, that doesn't negatively impact, or how do you teach it in a way that's just more aware of the impact for the kids in the class, you know?
Thank you so much for that. And I know that we've had this conversation about, what can you do differently? And a nice thing about it is that even introducing students to ideas behind race by looking at science,
Yes.
allows them more of an exploration, right? Where they can approach it from a genetics perspective or a just any kind of science perspective where you can learn about the genetics of, even skin color or some of the issues we have. But not from a deficit perspective, but from a point of, these are some challenges or these are our cultural resources. And so
Yeah.
that's really the goal of doing that. And I do have to highlight, by the way, maybe you should be the one to tell everyone. You did mention you would have when your daughter looked at a book.
Oh,
That's
I did. So, it was really great to see. So I'm conscious in purchasing books that have children of color in them, because her to see her reflection as many places as I can, right? So I purchased the book and and I told her that she wrote it and she was excited. And so she runs in the house and she goes and she sits on the balcony and I took this picture of her reading the book. But the first thing she said when she looked at it was, "Oh my gosh, she's a little girl. She looks just like me." And then her eyes just lit up. And that's all it took. Just that. And then she opens the book and she goes inside and she said, "Oh, look at her hair. She has a little backpack. I wonder what they're doing." But just the connection with seeing herself was so important, um, at this age. And no matter how much, no matter how many books I give, or no matter how many TV shows I try to curate this environment, it's still so important for her to see herself. And so it was really something special to kind of see her connect to that book just for those reasons initially. And then of course the adventure and the story was amazing. But um, it was really important for her and it made her smile to see herself, so
Could I add in something? Yeah, I mean, I really, it's really great hearing your perspective on this because it resonates so much with the mothers I spoke to, and that this is a lot of invisible labor, right? That I mean, of course, you love your daughter, you would move mountains for her, right? But at
yeah.
the same time, the school system that is set up that she enters into is not one that's trying to approach her from a perspective of a strengths perspective, right? And the fact that you were able to have that conversation with the teachers and you felt they were coming from a positive perspective is something that Black mothers have to do often if they want their children to be in spaces where they feel as though the educators are being racially sensitive and racially their kids are racially comfortable and that their kids are being like educated in a way that's not breaking them down. There is this sort of aftermath that you have to deal with. And so what I think is really important is that you highlighting that work and talking about it with us, because it's something that's invisible that I think a lot of white families aren't thinking, oh, if I send my kid to school, are they going to see images that are going to be disempowering to them? Or are things that are meant to be empowering going to be presented in ways that is actually disempowering to my child, right? So, um,
Yes.
which I think that the intention was to sort of show this strong, I would assume, strong civil rights leaders who have accomplished things. But if the other question is like, if that's happening in a vacuum where there's not a sort of comprehensive curriculum that's talking about Black people regularly and their accomplishments, it becomes the one time we're talking about it is when people can't do something, right? So it's a it's like again a lot of invisible labor that we're making visible by talking about it right now.
It is, and, as you say that, it makes me think about, I don't know what little white children think about this. I've been saying this since I was in college, like, my African American studies classes were profoundly impactful upon me in school. And I often think, well, what do these little white kids think when they go home and they hear about racism and segregation and slavery for the first time? Because I know when I did in elementary school, I went home and I talked to my parents and I said, "What happened? And
Mhm.
did you experience this?" And I wonder, are those conversations happening? Because if my child's feeling coming from a place of deficit, what does your child
Yeah.
feel?
I mean, I always say this is me adding some personal history here. Like I feel as though I went to school in Philadelphia, and I feel like I was fortunate enough to be educated during a time frame when a lot of the educators in Philadelphia were Black women who unfortunately probably were confronting, you know, occupational discrimination, which prevented them from doing other types of occupations, right? But I had, teachers who were Black who were like, kind of renovating the curriculum and bringing in stuff on a regular basis. So, and also the other space I think that one of the things that's interesting in my sample is that there was kind of a tension around church attendance for some of the parents. And so um, I had this happen at church. I'd go to church and like it was not just about, Christianity. It was about let's learn about like various Black accomplishments. And I wonder, as those institutions have shifted somewhat, have people have become less tied to them as people have moved on to other occupations. And this is by no means at all to fault the opportunities that came to Black women that they've pursued other occupations, but the sort of that sort of ability to reconstruct the curriculum in such a way that you can incorporate those types of things for some stuff. But I felt fortunate about that. I mean, I feel obviously it comes from a dark history of resident of discrimination in terms of occupational strategies for those women, but um, I wonder about how those institutions have changed and how that means that people aren't getting that education from those spaces anymore.
Hmm. Thank you so much. And I want to remind you to just put your comments in the Q&A uh, so that we can, see it later. Because we're not going to see what's in the chat. I discovered the chat doesn't get saved. The other thing is, I know that Dr. Amber Williams placed a Google Docs, not a Google Docs, a form. Just if you can give us feedback, keeping in mind this is NSF funded research, and NSF likes to know how their money is being spent and whether or not how effective this is and what you're learning from it. So the form is actually in the chat, and we now made a new discovery that if you're in a panel, you have access to the chat but not Q&A. But the Q&A is the only thing that gets saved. So if somebody could even move the form over to the Q&A, that would be awesome. And thank you so much for joining us today. I think it worked out. I was nervous that we didn't have enough time today, but we still were able to talk about this. So thank you so much for everyone for joining. And I'll probably send just one reminder email if you can just give me your feedback. I'm always looking for folks who are interested in participating. I haven't begun the for the new curriculum. I haven't begun the the classroom testing specifically as yet. So if anyone in a classroom setting is interested for the future, please, or interested earlier in participating in formulating this, please feel free to email me at my Howard University email. And yep, that's it. I think that will stop there for the day. So everyone, just have a good night. Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.